Begin the current daf, Mesechus Megillah daf Ches, begin on the top line of the Yavin, but we continue with the halacha, the next Mishnah. Again, continue the theme of all these Mishnayos, which are unrelated to our Masechta, but they have the same theme of Ein Bein, which we started off with the theme of our Masechta, with Ein Bein Adar Rishon Adar Sheni. We continue other halachas regarding Ein Bein and being Medayik, but for these other things, they are the same thing. Some ideas are going to, with Shei's correspondence, because of Cheskel, Tzanim Tam Dav Chem, B'Shem joining us for today's daf. Some things we're discussing today's daf are Mudeh Hana, the difference between someone who vows not to benefit from his friend and someone who does it specifically regarding food-related benefit. Nadarim and Nadavis, the difference between if someone says Harei Olai Oila, which is a neder, and that of Nadavis where he says Harei Zu, where he specifies that carbon itself. Zav, the difference between a Zav who experienced 2 emissions and one who experienced 3 emissions regarding the halachas of Mishka B'Moishav, regarding that they contaminate that which they sit and lay on even if they're not touching it, and regarding Sfira Shiva, the obligation of counting 7 clean days without experiencing any emissions before immersing, and carbon, the obligation to bring a carbon after they do immerse. Mitzayra Muzgur or Mitzayra Muchlit. The difference between a suspected Mitzayra who is quarantined, is confined for a 7-day period, and a confirmed Mitzayra known as Muchlit, who has brought definite signs of impurity, regarding halachas of priya and prima, regarding letting his hair grow, and regarding tearing his garments, and regarding shaluach b'tuma, regarding leaving the city walls and transmitting tuma, and tagalachas v'tziporim, which is after the purification, when they're not having that saras anymore, that purification process of shaving the hair and bringing 2 birds. So we begin the current daf Ches Amen Al. Ein Bein Hamuder Hana Mechaber. There is no difference between someone that took a vow prohibiting benefit from his friend, have any pleasure of him, to someone that only took a vow prohibiting from his friend food, which obviously the more severe one is the one that's taking a vow of any benefit, but really there's only two things that are different between those 2 types of vows. You have Iladrisas HaRegel, regarding just walking with your foot, which if you had taken a neder of any nehana, you're not allowed to come into the guy's property, but if you only took a vow of having food, so then you would be permitted. And the second difference is B'kelim shein oisim and oichel nefesh. You're allowed to borrow, you're allowed to lend to the one who took a neder of food, you're allowed to lend them a vessel that's not used in the preparation of food. Now, even that is qualified by Rashi, that specifically, and Tosfos also, if it's a place where they wouldn't rent such a vessel, but if they would rent it, such a type of vessel, so the Mishnah teaches explicitly in Mesechus Nadarim that it would be forbidden even to the one that's Mudur Meichel, because Rashi explains the rationale for this, that any pleasure, that if this person would not have given to you, it would have costed you a pruta, so that's Hanas Meichel, because with that pruta you can go to the grocery store and you could buy food. So any monies really essentially that you're having benefit from is considered Hanas Meichel. So it's only these 2 cases which has no monetary value. No one would rent it. You can't use it preparation of food. That's one case, that type of vessel to borrow. And regarding Drisa Regel, which has no monetary value, those would be the only 2 cases. Now, the Gemara says, the diuk, which we do by all these Mishnayos, but if it's a vessel that you do use in preparation of food, well then Zev is Shabbat, then they both would be the same, meaning it would be forbidden even someone that only took a vow of food, and even, like Rashi explains, in a place where they don't rent such vessels, still, they have the fact that you could use it in preparing food is considered Hanas Meichel and would be forbidden for them all. Now, one of the cases we said that's a difference between them is Drisas HaRegel. We said that walking on his property, taking a shortcut, is something that only has Hanas Meichel. It's not for Mud Hana and not Hanas Meichel. Says the Gemara, but I don't understand. Hold cup the inchi. But people are not particular about that, and therefore, as Rashi explains, so why is it us even with Mud Hana? Well, what type of pleasure is that considered? So, and as Tosfos points out, although we find other places in Shas that people are particular, but Rabbi Ender Tam says he would talk about a bika, like a valley where people are, it's not really a person's courtyard or something like that, so people are not particular. So that's what the Gemara is asking. Okay, Mudur Meichel, you're saying it's permitted, but Mudur is forbidden. Why does anyone not know what type of pleasure is that? Even people don't even care. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava says you're right, but Haman, who's the Talmud of Mishnah, is Rebbe Eliezer. The moment that he says Vitur, something that a person would be mevater, meaning generally a person wouldn't care. It's still asab b'munana, because ultimately lamaisa, I am giving you pleasure. People don't usually care, so it shouldn't be considered as a pleasure, but because people are mevater. But technically, without vitor, I'm giving you something, and therefore, even though people are forgiving, still it's considered a prohibition, a violation of the hana, and that would be a case that's different between the mudah hana and mudah min ha'meichel. The next Mishnah continues on another ein bein. Ein bein nedarim lenadavis. There's no difference between a vow and a neder, which the Gemara is going to explain that a neder is someone says, Harei olai oila. I take it upon myself to bring an oila, and only later on does he separate and designate it. Then he's responsible for the insurance of that animal, because it was his responsibility. And the dava is, he says, no, Harei zu. He doesn't accept responsibility. He says, this animal will be a carbon. So there's no difference in halacha between the neder and the dava. Ella, the one difference is, a vow, you are responsible. If something happens to it, you have to insure it, you have to replace it. But the dava is, in the dava, this is the carbon. Whatever happens to it, happens to it. It's not my responsibility. Now, again, the Gemara always makes a diak. You tell me this is the only ein bein is obviously trying to tell me that there's things that are going to be similar. Regarding the violation of not to delay the 3 Yom Tovim that you're supposed to bring the carbon by, they're both going to be the same. And what's the chiddush? And that's what Rashi explains. Even though the halacha bal ta'achar is not written by the halacha of Nedava, but the Gemara Rosh Hashanah already learns that from Xer Shabbat to compare Neder to Nedava to tell me just like Neder has the halacha of bal ta'achar, so to Nedava has halacha bal ta'achar. Now the Gemara says in clarification of this Neder Nedava, it's not Hasan. Learned over there in the Mishnah in Mesechtes Kinim. The Mishnah there says probably the one Mishnah that you could probably read over there, because Kinim is so complicated, but that one part that says Ezel Neder. So what's considered as a vow? So the Mishnah says, so it says, I take it upon myself to bring an oila. That's a neder. Is a neder. What's a neder? That is a donation. It says, oh, this is an oila. Now, ma bein neder and neder says the Mishnah, what's the difference between a vow and a neder? Similar to what our Mishnah said. Is nedarim a vow mesuiv? Let's say the animal dies. I think the was stolen. Well, they got lost. Well, Chaim Bachirson is responsible for to insure it. The Davis, on the other hand, the donation, mesuiv, it dies, the Nigmor gets stolen, or other gets lost. In the Chaim Bachirson is not responsible for its insurance. So the Gemara that comes to explain this halacha. Where do we know this from? That a neder is something that you are having achrayis for. So I'm going to learn the brayso. Pasuk says in my Yikra that the nirtzalai, it's going to be accepted for him, l'chaper olav, to be an atonement for him. So Shimon he explains the pasuk, Escha alav, this that is on him, Chayiv Bachar Yusay is responsible for insurance. Ve'esha Eino alav, that which is not on him. And the Chayiv Bachar Yusay, he's not responsible for his insurance, which we don't say this explicitly. Rashi explains what the pasuk, how you're supposed to translate it. The Nir Tzalai, it's going to be accepted for him what? His neder, when he's going to have this, what the pasuk says, the words L'chaper, when he's going to get an atonement with it, that's what the pasuk is going to be v'nir tzalai. But sounds like before you kapar, then you didn't do what you had to do. Now, which carbon am I telling you that this is where the halacha applies? That until you get it to the finish line, which is obviously your responsibility, your insurance on Christ when you get the kapara, is with that which is Allah. The Allah of the pasuk is saying that which is on you. That's the type of carbon that you're only going to get the ritzui when you do the kapara, which obviously you're gonna have to make sure it gets there, which is machrayis. Now says the wait a second, my mashma, where do you see that the word Allah infers an acceptance of responsibility? So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Avdimi says, even the Amma Alai, once the person says Harei Alai, that it's on me, command the Torah Nakazah, it's like he's carrying on the shoulder. Which means to say that you're accepting responsibility. That's what the word olav is coming to say, and that's referring to the case of the neder, which that's when you have l'chaper. It's only when you have the kapara, when you brought it ultimately, then it's going to be v'ner tzaloi. That's what the pasuk is indicating, this halacha of the obligation of the neder versus that of the nedava.
What if the neder dies?
What?
What if he dies? Not the animal, the person who made the neder. Is Nichai Bachayis, is his kids?
The Yershim. If the Yershim have to bring his neder. Yeah, I think they do have to bring his nedarim. What?
By nedava, he wouldn't.
Oh, you mean to say, well, that's the chesem halacha zachrayis. Yeah.
That's a nigma going on, it doesn't say it makes...
If he dies. I hear. If that Milsa the Shrich or not, to say that's the case. So we continue with the next Mishnah of Ein Bein. Ein Bein Zav, Haroy Yishtei Re'iyas. There's no difference between a Zav, who has an emission, a discharge from his Aver. If he's Roy Yishtei Re'iyas, if he has 2 discharges, whether that be in 1 day or 2 consecutive days, you can't be missing a day in between, but either whether on 1 day or 2 days, There's no difference if he sees 2 discharges, L'Rei Shalish, or if he sees 3 discharges. Again, that could either be one day, or 3 consecutive days, or 2 in one day, and 1 in the next day. But as long as you don't have any day gap in between, there's no difference between them. Ela Carbon, the one difference is that the one who had the discharge for 3 times, when he's matar himself, he would have to bring a carbon, but the one of the 2 would not have to bring a carbon. Says the Gemara, okay, again, this is our theme, we keep on being medayik, what they are the same. Regarding, however, the halacha of if he lays down or he sits, even if it's 10 garments, one on the other, they all become an avhatum, which is interesting, even if he didn't touch them. Usually when you touch something, the transmission goes one lower. Now the zav himself is avatum. Here, not only does he not even make a difference if he doesn't touch it, it could be the 10th garment on the bottom, it actually takes him the same tumah as himself. That's what's known as mishkav and moisha. Now, whereas if let's say he would touch something that's not a bedding or it's not a seat, it would only become a rishon l'tumah, and again, it would only be that which you touch, which the difference is the rishon l'tumah cannot contaminate a person or a vessel, only contaminate food or beverages. But the zav that has the discharge twice or 3 times, for that they're the same, and there's svita shiva. The halacha is when the ziva discharge stops, then he has to count 7 clean days before he immerses himself. And if during those 7 days he saw even 1 discharge, that would demolish the whole counting. He would have to start over again. So for those 2 halachas, obviously you're saying Zev Hashem that they're both the same. They both have the halacha of Mishkav Moshe and the svira, the counting of Shiva Nikiyim. So says the Gemara, we do know that the zav is the same, whether it's 2 or 3 for the laws of Tumah, but they're not the same as our Mishnah said we're going to the laws of a carbon. So as the Gemara turn on like we're looking at Brisa. He says, Monakas of Stein. It's interesting. The pasuk counts discharges 2 times. As Rashi brings in Mayikar Tezvav, it says V'ishki is zav memsar. If a man's going to have the word zav means actually flowing. It's like a flow of a certain type of liquid that comes out of the male member. So it says if it's going to flow from his flesh, zoivoi, his flow. So it says 2 times zoivoi, and it says tamehu. So you see that it's mentioning 2 zivas, 2 flows, and B'kari Tameh, it's calling him Tameh. Now on the other hand, you have Shalish. It says also there in the parasha, it says 3 times. So it counts the word Zayv 3 times, and then B'kari Tameh, it calls him Tameh. So the question is, Haketza, if you're telling me from 2 times of a flow you become Tameh, so why does the pasuk do it again regarding 3 times Zav and then becoming Tameh? If you became Tameh after 2, you obviously are Tameh. You don't have to say, why would you say 3 times? Says Reb Simai, there's a difference. Because Shtayim Tumah. You're right, after 2 discharges, you have all the severity of the Tumah of a Zav. But the reason why we mentioned differently for 3 times is because it has a different halacha. It has then the obligation of a carbon. Says the Gemara, wait a second. The Aimer, maybe I can tell you otherwise. I'll tell you the other way. Say Shtayim l'Tumah v'loy l'Carbon. You're right. After 2 times you have obligation of Tumah and not carbon. But maybe Shalosh l'Carbon v'loy l'Tumah. Maybe after 3 times, it's not saying that it's both. Maybe it's only carbon and not Tumah, which Rashi explains. You would not have at least the severe Tumah of a Zav. You would have like a regular Balkari, so it only lets it 1 time. How do you know that when you see it 3 times, it's telling you that you can have a carbon? And Thomas says, so he'll say, how could you say that? Until he saw 3 times Rosh Tayim, he saw twice. He already had all the severity of the Tumah from 2 times, which you tell me that's the one who has 2 times. When he saw a 3rd time, who's removing him from the Tumah? So he was, okay, no, you're right. Ve'ema maybe say, but the other way around. Meaning, say, Shtayim l'Carbon v'lo l'Tumah. Say maybe 2 times would obligate you in the carbon, but you wouldn't have the severity of the Tumah. And Shalish Av l'Tumah, maybe 3 times would tell you that, no, also for Tumah. But how do you know that the carbon's only by the 3 and not the 2? Maybe the carbon's by the 2, and that by the 3 gets introduced to laws of Tumah. So the Gemara, you cannot entertain this, because the time of the Brisa. Pas says of Yikra, V'chiber lav hakoyin lefnei Hashem, the koyin will atone for this person in front of Hashem, mezayvai, from his ziva discharge, which sounds like miktzas zayvai. Only from, what does that mean? Miktzas zav and mevi'in carbon, the bechiper in this pasuk is talking when the kohen brings the carbon of the zav. So when you're saying a mem, which is a prefix that's saying only some, miktzas zav and mevi'in carbon, that means only some zav bring a carbon. Miktzas zav and mevi'in carbon, some zav don't bring a carbon. Now, how would you illustrate this? Obviously, are you saying Rosh Shalish maybe? So you'll say, okay, if he has 3 discharges, he brings a carbon. Shtaim, maybe 2 he doesn't bring. Or maybe no, you're going to tell me Rosh Beis maybe if he has 2 discharges, he brings a carbon. Rosh Shalish, maybe if he has 3 discharges, he doesn't bring. I mean, you're going to say, how can you say that? Actually, Rosh Shalish, Rosh Shtaim. Before he saw 3, he already saw 2. If you tell me he's chayav a carbon after 2, how could he not have that chiyuv when he sees the 3rd time? So therefore, you see from Mezayvai that only some Zaven, and therefore must be that the 3 brings the carbon and the 2 doesn't bring the carbon. Now the Gemara wonders now, we really have 2 drashas now. On the one hand, Ve'itzach de Reb Simai, we have the drash of Reb Simai. Reb Simai pointed out that it says 2 times Zayvah then Tama, and it says 3 times Zayvah and then Tama, which we said, obviously the difference between 2 and 3, which we said, what's the difference is the carbon. And then on the other hand, you also have Mezayvai, which only says Umikta Zavin, from the Zayvah. Only some have the carbon, some don't. Why didn't he both of these drashas? Says I'll tell you what. Even the Reb Simai I only had the first drash of Reb Simai that it says 2 times Zav and then 3 times Zav. I would have said Kikosha, like our question was, wait a second, how do you know that when you have number 3 is introducing carbon, maybe number 3 is introducing Tumah, and maybe from 2 is carbon without Tumah, and 3 gets carbon with Tumah. How do you know that the number 3 is the difference of the carbon? Maybe number 3 is the difference of the Tumah. That's why, as our Gemara had said, you had to have Mizayvah to tell you, because that pasuk is talking about explicitly the Chipur, is talking about the carbon. And Mikta Zavin, obviously, if you're saying only some have and some don't, would obviously have to be number 3, not number 2, because you can't have 2 and then not have a 3 anymore. So obviously, you need to have Mizayvah. Now the question is, what about the other way around? The Mizayvah. Why don't I just have Mizayvah, which says Mikta Zavin bring a carbon and some don't, which obviously that means to say that what's being introduced is carbon by number 3. No, says the Gemara, then Leidani Kamariyas. I wouldn't know how many discharges. Yes, I would know some Zavin do bring a carbon, some don't, but I wouldn't know, is it 3 and 4, is it 2 and 3? Kamashmon Reb Simai, that's why you needed Reb Simai's drasha, which you see. The Torah says Zav 2 times, then Tama, it says 3 times, then Tama. And I know the numbers that I'm talking about, and then I need Mezevah to qualify that and say that it's regarding the carbon that we're changing from between 2 and 3. Okay, that's the source for the halacha of our Mishnah. And now the Gemara wonders, now that you told me that, when you quoted the pasuk of Echipal of Akoin of Hashem Mezayvai, you told me, the mem is miktzas. So you made a whole drasha and be mechali between the zav of 2 discharges to that of 3 discharges. So then I'll ask you from another pasuk. There's a pasuk in Vayikra that says V'chiyitzad hazav mezayvai, when the tar purifies himself from a ziva discharge. So the pasuk there continues and says he's going to have to count 7 clean days. Then he washes his garments and he tables in the mikveh and then he becomes tar. So the question is, my daughter should be. What are you expounding over there? It sounds like only some Zavin have the halacha of Shiva Nikiyim, because he's saying the mem is like some, right? So, but that's not true, because we know that the halacha of Shiva Nikiyim, you told me, is the same for both of them. So what would the mem be saying over there? Says the Gemara Homi Baile. That you need for the following drasha. Gitani learn the Brisa. The Brisa, interestingly, takes apart every single word and makes the drasha out of it. The pasuk that we just quoted, the Brisa quotes also. It says, "V'chiyitter hazav." When the zav is going to purify himself, what does that mean? That means l'kashayifsik mizayva, meaning when he stops having his flow, which, as Rashi explains, you don't have to table before you start your Shiva Nikiyim. Rather, when you stop your flow, that's what the pasuk is saying. The moment you stop your flow and you become tahar, then you start, like the pasuk says, of the Mesafa Shiva Zom L'Torah. You start counting Shiva Nikiyim. So that's what this part of the pasuk is saying. When the pasuk continues and says that the zav is going to purify himself mezayvai, which is from his flow. What's the word mezayvai? Of course, it's from his flow. He's a zav. What do you need to say the word mezayvai? So the Brisa to teach you that he doesn't have to stop from his flow and from his negav tziras. What does that mean to say? So Rashi explains. If let's say this zav was a gedapelta, he was a zav and he was a mitzvah. Now his flow stopped, but he wasn't yet healed from his negav tziras. So what the pasuk is telling us is he could count, and that is we don't tell him, wait a second, you can't count until you're clean and you purify also from your negav tziras. No, he counts right away, and we count that counting of the ziva shiva nikiyim. Now, when he's ultimately going to be purified from his tziras too, then he's going to table the first tefillah that a mitzvah does, which is going to help for the tefillah of his nega, which is going to be his first tefillah, and for his ziva discharge, which is after his shiva nikiyim. So then he's going to be pure from being Mitama Mishka b'Moshe, and from being Mitama a earthenware vessel by Hesed, by causing it to move, which is the halacha of a zav. Now, although he starts to count another 7 days for his tzardas regarding eating kodshim, and that second tefillah comes after that, like it says in the Mitzayr in Vayikru Yadalin, v'rochatz b'mayim b'tor, he bathed himself in water and becomes pure, and then he comes into the machna. Then he's still 7 days mechutz from his oil, and then on the 7th day he goes and he shaves off his ear again, and then he goes to mikvah again. Still, what the pasuk is telling us, that first tefillah would still be enough to be matar from the tumah of Mishka Moshe and Kli Cheres B'Hesed, because it'll take care of his tumah of his ziva, although he's still not purified from his tzaras. That's the chiddush of mizayvai, that you just have to count from your ziva. I don't care if you have something else like a negav tzaras. Then the next words in the pasuk, simply the pasuk reads like this: Chiyita zav mizayvai, when the zav is going to be purified from his ziva, kama. And then he counts 7 days, his Shiva Nikiyim to purify himself. But the Brisa says, Mizayvai v'safar, which essentially the reason why we have the word of counting near the Ziva discharge, to teach you that even because of Miktzah Zav, you would have to have a Svida. That's what the Pasuk is coming to teach you. In Mezayvai, yeah, the Mem is teaching me something. Miktzah is when he doesn't have all 3 discharges. When he has only 2 discharges, that it's still going to have a suffer. Liman azav b'shtei, it comes to teach you regarding a zav that had 2 discharges. Shetoim tzvida shivya, even though he wasn't a zav gomer, he was only a miktzah zav, which the Gemara Hamad Bey is going to explain that we seem to be including from this mem, and the other we were excluding. But even a partial zav, which has 2 discharges, he still has the halacha of counting shiva nikiyim. Now, the question is, wait a second, Valay dinu, but we would know this from logic, because in Mitamim Mishka b'Moshe, if the Zav that has 2 discharges has all the severity of the Tumah of Zav, as we established this before, because it says Zav, Zav, and then it says Tameh, so he's going to contaminate the bed and the seat that he's sitting on. Well, you don't think he would have to count 7 clean days? From where would you think that he would be excluded from the halacha of counting 7 clean days, that you need to have a special pasuk, a special drasha, mizayva v'safar, to tell you that he's going to have the halacha of Shem Nikim? Why would you think not, that you need to have a special drasha? So the Gemara continues on the days and says, what are you talking about? It's not a logic, it's not dinu. If a person sees a woman has her 7 and 11, which is the days of Nida and Ziva. So, and the 7 days are the days that we expect her to have her period, which is the 7 days of Nida. And then there's 11 days of Ziva, which we don't expect a woman to have a discharge in those days. Now, if a woman does see 1 or 2 days during those 11 days between her Nida days, so then the halacha is she's only shemeres yoyim, which means to say she has to make sure just 1 day that she doesn't have a discharge, and she can take herself that same day. That will disprove your logic. Because you know what the halacha is over there? The halacha is there, Shabbatama Mishka b'Moshe, as brought in the last sugya needed of Ayin Beis and Beis, where we include this. The bedding that she lays on, or the chair that she sits on, will become contaminated with Tumah Mishka b'Moshe. The Eina turn the Sfira Shivya, and the woman doesn't require 7 clean days, she only has to count 1 clean day. So you also shouldn't wonder about this. Yeah, although the Zavu had 2 discharges, has to have he mitam mishkan mishkan. We wouldn't know definitively that you would have to count 7 clean days, because that's halacha with the shemeres yain. Therefore, Tam 11, that's what the Brisa said. We have to learn that from the pasuk. Mezayvay b'safa. Yeah, that even when it's mezayvay, it's not a full zav. It's only from, which is miktzah zayvay b'safa. Even if you're only a partial zav, which liman al zav bal shtei is come to teach you regarding the zav who has 2 discharges. Shetor tzvida shima, that he has to count 7 clean days. That's what we're learning out from the Med. Now, the problem the Gemara has with this, as we had already mentioned in passing on Aleph, only the Pabal Abai. He says it's interesting. Why is it when from this mezayvai, which we said it says zayvai b'safar loy, and you're expounding that miktzah zav, you tell me you're coming to include a partial zav requires 7 clean days, which is the zav that had only 2 discharges. Now, so that's, you're telling me the manbi bezav b'shtei. You're coming to include a zav who has 2 discharges and not 3 for the halacha of counting 7 clean days. Now, but why the previous drasha we did on Omen Aleph, which was regarding carbon, which it says v'chiper hakoyin, and it says over there meizayvai. You didn't expound, that a miktzah zav, that you can include the zav who has two discharges, that he has an obligation of a carbon. Rather, you expounded that the miktzah zavin require, and you said that who's the miktzah zavin is the one who had three discharges, and actually the mamayim bezav b'shteiris. You actually excluded from the mem a zav who has two discharges. What's the difference? There's two ways of saying miktzahs. You could say miktzahs quantitative. You could say like that, some of the zavin, they're going to have this halacha. Who's some? Well, who's the primary zav is the one that has three discharges. We're excluding the one that had only two from Em Nalach Ukarbon. Yet here you have the same wording of mezayva v'safa, and you say, even a partial zav, which is a miktzah zav, even they will have this halacha v'safa of counting Shem Nikim. So you're including the Baal Shtei Riyas. Where is this discrepancy, this discretion of choosing one to include and one to exclude? So Amalei, Abaye said to Papa, he says, I'll tell you why, because it's what's called gishpat. It has to be like this. Isa Gedalech, if we were entertained to say hi, that regarding this last halacha of counting Shem Nikim, if you would think, as we did the first time, that the word mezaiva is the mu'ute hudas, is coming to exclude the zavas two discharges, that wouldn't be that can't be the reason. Because l'shtekra minei, then the pasuk should have been silent, should not have said anything. And from where would you think to say to include the one who has two discharges to have the halacha of counting Shem Nikim? If it was coming to exclude, just be quiet. I would know he's not included. And if you're going to say, what do you mean? Medina, I would know it from logic, like we had said before. That we said if it's going to have Tum Mishkal Elisha, of course it should have counting Shem Nikim. And that says about no, you would not include it because you said Shemedes Yom Keneged Yom Techiach, which the Shemedes Yom has the Mishkal Elisha and doesn't have a counting Shem Nikim. And Mechitim, if you're going to say, wait a second, hi, this Mizayva Mibayale, you needed to tell you Mizayva V'lai, Mizayva Umenigai. But what do you mean? You can't use Mizayva for the Safar. Mizayva is to tell you that only from the Ziva you have to be clean, but not from the Nega. No, it's not true because Imkain, if that would be the case, Licht of Kra, the Pasuk could have written Chiyitar Hazav. And when the Zav is purified, Balishtik, and be quiet. I wouldn't need Mezayvai. From the fact that it says V'chiyitar Hazav, when the Zav is pure, and it doesn't say just V'chiyitar, which I'm already talking about the Zav, so I would have already expounded V'chiyitar Hazav means from the Zav. And I would know that you don't need to have it purified from the nega. So mezayver lamali. Why do I need the extra word mezayver? Obviously to make this drasha that mezayver only even if it's a partial zav would still require v'safa. Lima, this comes to teach you al zav bal shtei is when you have a zav who had even just two discharges shetoin tzvira shiva that he needs counting seva because you can't say it's coming to exclude like we did around the carbon because excluding I wouldn't need a pasuk. I would know this that. Where would I even know that he has it to need to exclude it? Obviously, if the pasuk is mentioning, obviously coming to include in contrast to carbon, which is coming to exclude. Therefore, that's why he said there's a difference between mezayvai, one place we're including, and one place we're excluding. Regarding carbon, we're excluding. We're saying that, hey, although we really treat the Zal Bal Shtei Riyos the same thing as the Baal Gimel Riyos, as we said, we're even including him for Shem Nikim, but for carbon, we're going to differentiate. That's where we're excluding. And including is for the Shem Nikim, because until I have that Reba of Shem Nikim, why would I say that he would have it to exclude it? Obviously, it's coming to include. Now, look at the next Mishnah. Also, continue on this theme of Ein Bain. Ein Bain Mitzayda Muzger. There's no difference between a Mitzayda who has a neg, like some type of a discoloration on his body, on the skin. There's no difference between a Mitzayda that's Muzger, that's confined, that's in quarantine, the Mitzayda Muchlit, to a confirmed Mitzayda, which after he finished his time in quarantine for the week, then they see there's some signs of tumah on him, so then he becomes a definitive mitzvah. There's no difference between them when they're in their mitzvah status. Ela priya uprima. The only difference is that the mitzvah muchlet has to tear his garments, and his head has to be that his hair is growing long. Now, additionally, that's regarding when they're in the mitzvah status. One is just confined because where he's suspected, and the other one is confirmed. Now, but additionally, it means tahor miteiches, because there's no difference when you're purifying yourself from the confinement, which that also gives you a certain tumah, even though you were never confirmed. There's no difference between the purification from heskel to tumah to being purified from a confirmed mitzvah status. Now, teklachas v'tzipar. The only difference is regarding having to bring the birds and regarding shaving off all your body hair. That's only going to be by the mitzvah muchlid and not by the mitzvah muzkir. Now, but again, as we do in all these mishnayos, but hala'in and shiluach. But regarding being sent out of the walls of the city, which is out of all the three machnas, and betuma, regarding having all the severity of the tumah that applies to mitzayra, both of them would be equal that of muzgir and of muchlid. So says the Imam, where do we know this from? That the halacha priya and prima of tearing the garment and letting the hair grow long does not apply by the muzgir, by the one who's only quarantined. Because, as Rashi explains, how do you know that? Maybe the Torah says about muchlid, but the same thing would apply to the muzgir, like you say regarding tumah. You say that the tumah of a mitzayra that's confirmed is the same thing as the one who's only confined. So maybe priya and prima would also be. Says the Gemara, no, the Tani Rav Shmuel by Yitzchak Kamid Rav Huni taught the following price. Pasuk says in Vayikra, which is talking about the mitzayra that is being purified from his hezkir, from his quarantine. He was never confirmed as a mitzayra. The end of the pasuk there says, the kohen's going to purify him. Mispachasi, it was just like a fleck, that's a Yiddish word. It was just like a stain. It wasn't really tzaras. V'chibes begadav v'toher. And people say I teach English, I'll start teaching Yiddish also. V'chibes begadav v'toher, and he washes his garments. And v'toher. Now the word v'toher over here is important because it doesn't say that which would seem to be the appropriate word of vayetaher, which would say that he's purifying him now, mekan laba. It says v'toher. The word v'toher actually is a past tense. So what does that mean? What does it mean past tense? It's purifying him now. What do you mean? And he was purified. So and that says the Brisa, it means that since he was only mitzvah muzger, he's tar mipriya uprima de me'ekara. It's coming to tell us that even before he tabled himself, he was tar from some of the tumas of the severity of the mitzvah. You know what he was always tar from? He never had the halacha of having to tear his garments and let his hair grow long. That's what is being alluded to in the word v'tahir, that he always was tar from this halacha. That's where you see the halacha. On that, the Gemara asks, Amalei Rav. He says, wait a second. If that's what the word v'tahir, because it's a past tense, is coming to teach you, then I'll ask you from a different context, which happens to be the context of the previous Mishnahs, but it's nothing to do with our halacha mitzayra. Gabi Zav. Regarding a Zav, who is a man who has a discharge from his male member, the Chsiv, it says there in the pasuk, and Vayikra, at the end when he's purifying himself, it says, he's going to wash his garments. V'tahir. The same word v'tahir again, which is past tense. Hasamai v'tar me'karika. What are you talking about? What does the Zav have that you're telling me that he always had this purity? Ella, rather, obviously, it's not the way you're saying it. V'tar means to say, yeah, tar hashta, it does mean, obviously I'm getting it, says the Gemara, that it's not a future tense, but it's not the way you're saying it, that it's something that always was. It's something that is futuristic but past tense also. What does that mean? So the Gemara explains. Tar hashta, it's obviously from here on, because it's not something made cover. He's going to be tar now, militamic klicheres behesed, from contaminating earthenware vessel by causing it to move. Well, what does that mean? Of course, he's tar now, he just purified himself. No, it's not true, because Avagav the Hadar Chazi, even if this Zav, who just purified himself, will subsequently see a discharge on the same day, Loi Mitama Lemafreya. He's through the halach of Tumas Hesed, he's not going to retroactively make this Tumah, which as Rashi fills in the statement, even though he's tabling during the daytime, on day 7, and interestingly, if he ends up having a discharge that same day that he went to the mikvah, it's actually going to demolish the whole Shiva Nakim he had. And actually, whatever he sat on that whole week will retroactively have Tumas Mishkan B'Meishav. As the Gemara says in Pesachim the Pe'alf Menaf, for sure, as it applies to a person. So, it actually is demolishing everything. What the Chiddush is, what we see from the word V'tahir, is that even so, it is effective, his Tevilah, that it will not contaminate an earthenware vessel that he caused to move through Hesed, which is not even touching it, but just causing it to move. if it was between his Tvila and that discharge on day 7, as this is expounded so in Teres Kohanim. Now Rashi explains what's the pshat in this halacha, that we're expounding specifically v'toher, which is really mikan al-abba, but it also has a retroactivity related to that, because whatever's going to be from the tefillah till that discharge will not retroactively be tamei, but it's really mikan al-abba. Why is that specifically regarding the tumah of an earthenware vessel? So that says Rashi, because this pasuk that we're quoting of Torah is right after where it says v'kli cheres asher yigeh bo hazav. It's right after the halacha that the earthenware vessel that the zav is going to touch, which actually doesn't even really mean touching. The Brisa in Teres Kohanim actually says that that's referring to the halacha of hesed. Hesed is when you cause it to move of an earthenware vessel of the zav, because there is no other tamei that will contaminate an earthenware vessel by causing it to move, which is hesed, but the zav. So it's going back on that halacha. That's what we're saying, that the V'toher is telling you that it's going to be retroactive, but it's really from here on. Meaning, if let's say at 3 o'clock he went to the mikvah, and at 4 o'clock before Shtia he had a ziva discharge. The halacha is everything he had in the last week that he sat on, you were zav. You never became purified, and it's all tumah. The one difference is this halacha of V'toher, which is if whatever between 3 and 4 o'clock he caused an earthenware vessel to move, that will not become tamei. That's the chiddush of this halacha of V'toher. It's not me'ikara, but it does have a certain present tense to it, like past tense, because whatever in that hour he caused with tumas hesed is not going to be tamei. That's what the halacha is coming to tell you. If that's the case, says Gemara, then hachinami here also, when it says V'toher by the Mitzayra, it means tar hashta, not retroactive. It's tar now milatama bebila mafreya, from contaminating by coming into the same house retroactively. So again, it doesn't mean meikara. It means it's from this point, if you like watching a graph, from this point onwards back to this point. But it's not what was before this point. What is this? So Rashi explains, one of the stringencies of Mitzayra is that he could contaminate a person or vessels by just coming into the same house as him. So even if, let's say, this mispachas, this stain on his body comes back, and it actually expands, and now it actually becomes tamei, those items that were in the house with him in that interim period are going to be tar. Because the pasuk says, in pasuk tifsam mispachas ba'orif, let's say this stain on his body will expand, although it's going to be tamei, what is effective is his tefillah to purify the vessels that came with him into the house. Because Mitzayra does contaminate by just coming into the house, like a Brisa teaches to us. This is the law for all the neged tzadas and the lenesek l'tzas habeged l'bayis. It compares it to the house. Just like a house obviously contaminates when you come into it, so too all of them, including the Mitzayra of the body, those are contaminated when you come in. That's just the Gemara. You don't learn out your halacha that you wanted to tell me of that. This halacha of the difference between priya and prima, that you tell me that over tar means it was always tar from priya and prima. It's not true, because as you see by zav, it doesn't mean something that was always, it just means from here on backwards. Here also, what would you say by mitzvah from here on backwards? It means regarding the halacha, tumas bayis. So the Gemara rejects this source and says, Elam Rava, rather you're right. It says Rava, how do we know that there's no priya and prima by the musger? You only have it by the muchlet. Malach is from a different source, a pasuk in the Yikra. It says Vatzaru Ashaboy HaNega, that the Mitzayro has in him the nega. That's who the pasuk says his garments have to be torn and his hair has to grow long. What's boy? It means Misha Tzadate Tlui Begufa. It means someone that the tzaras is dependent on his body. Boy is in him. As long as the tzaras was not healed, he's going to be tamei. Now that's the muchlet, because the purification of the Mitzayro who is confirmed, it's only when it says Nirpa HaNega Tzaras Min HaTzarua. Yatzezeh, that excludes the musger, who was only suspected, who was quarantined. Shein Tzarate Tluya Begufay, his purification actually does not depend on his body, Ela B'Yamim. Whereas as long as he stays his quarantine period, that if you don't find on day 7 any signs of tumah, of let's say white hairs or expansion, he's going to be tar, even though his stain on his body is the same as it always was. So you see from the pasuk, the reading of boy, that it's only the one that purification is in his body, which is the muchlet. That's who has the halacha priya and prima, not the mitzayr who's musgar. But Amalei Abaye says, wait a second. Elamiat, if that's the case, look at the next pasuk. It says, Kol Yemei Asher Nega Boy Yitma. all the days that the nega is in him, the same word boy, he's going to be tummy. Now, that pasuk talks about sending him out of the machna. It says mechutz lamachna meshabbet, then he's got to sit out of the machna. So let's make the same drasha. Say misha tzadat tli begufo, someone that the tzras is in his body because the word boy, who the ton shloch, he needs to be sent out. But if the tzras not dependent on his body, ein ton shloch does not need to be sent out. And Bechitim, if you're going to say, yeah, you're right, that would be the difference between Muzga and Muchlet. But we're going to learn our Mishnah not like that. Our Mishnah says, Amen, Mitzvah, Muzga, Mitzvah, Muchlet, there's no difference between the confined and the confirmed. Mitzvah, Ela Priya Prima, only tearing the garments and letting the hair grow long. And we made the dik in the Gemara, Hala and Sheluach, but regarding being sent out of the Machna, well, the Tamui, Babi, and to condemn when you come into the same house. So there's someone say the same, but why? It says the word Bay, and you said Bay means Tala Beguf, which only Muchlet, not Muzga. So Amalei says, yes, good point, but the word Yemei, when it could have said Yemei. Instead it said Kol Yemei. The word Kol is always a ribun. L'rabas mitzayda muskul l'shiluach. It's come to include the confined mitzayda for shiluach. But then the Gemara says another question. Ihachi, if you're telling me that you would always say the muchlet would be like the musgar, the only reason why you exclude the musgar is because it says the word bai. So then, teglachas v'tzipor in my time alone, then why are you telling me that when the purification of the musgar is different than the muchlet, that only the muchlet requires to shave of all his body hair and to bring the birds, and not the musgar? The Tana we learned in the Mishnah. There's no difference when you in your purification process when you're healed to be cleared from confinement. To that of confirmed, the only difference he told me is regarding shaving over the body hair and bringing the birds. Which Rashi points out, although there actually is also karbanis of Asham and the like of Shemin, here we're talking about on the day that he just purifies himself. We're not talking about the karbanis, which is on the day 8. We're talking about the purification, that the only difference is that God was wrong. Why? Why is that even a difference? It doesn't say boy over there, so why would you exclude Musgar? Abai, he says, because Amakar the Pasuk says, V'yotza hakoyin l'machutz l'machna. The koyin goes out of the machna to go check up on this mitzvah that's outside. And v'hini nirpa negat tzaras. And behold, his negat tzaras has been healed. And that's what the pasuk says after that. Oh, he's got to bring 2 live birds that are kosher, and he goes, he cuts up his ear. But what you see from the pasuk is, it says nirpa. Misha tzarata tlui b'refu is only the one who's tzaras. To purify him depends on actually being healed from that. Yotzah Zed, that excludes the muscular, like we said, she'en tzarata tlui b'refu is. We said his being healed doesn't depend on necessarily that the nega has to be removed. He'll be yom, as long as he went 7 days without any change, without any white hair, without any expansion, he'll be tar. So therefore you see that the halacha of taglacha and tzipor is also only regarding that of the muchlet and not regarding that of the musgar. So now look at the next Mishnah. Here on the theme of the Ein Bains. Ein Bains Svarim. There's no difference between the Sefarim of Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim. L'tfil mezuzahs, to the writing of that's in the tfil and the mezuzahs. Ella, the only difference is Shasvarim nechtav mechalashim. The Sifri Torah and the Nevi'im Ksuvim can be written in all languages, but tefillah and mezuzahs ain't nechtav as elashudas. But tefillah and the mezuzahs can only be written with the Hebrew lettering, Lashon HaKodesh, which is the Ashuri script. Shimon Lilam, it says no, it's not true. He disagrees with Tanakama. It says Apes Svarim lahitiru sheyichtavu. Even by the Svarim, they didn't permit you to write some other language except for Lashon HaKodesh. Eli Avanas. The only exception was Greek, and the Gemara is going to explain the reason why Greek, but he disagrees with the Tanakh that allows it to be written in all languages. But let's just make the first diik and end over here. But it sounds like, as we're saying in all these Mishnayos, a holotayfrin begidin, but to stitch it with ligaments, which all their svarim were made in like parchment. And halacha meshbesina is that by tefillin and mezuzahs it has to be stitched with the tendons of the kosher animal. Now, however, regarding a Sefer Torah, there's a machlikas and makas David Aleph and Aleph, if you could stitch a Sefer Torah with linen. And now we're telling you that our Mishnah is like the one who says that it's invalid. No, a Sefer Torah also has the same halacha tzvah, has to be stitched with ligaments. And regarding the contaminating of the hands, which was a gezeidah that they made, that if you touch a sefer, it's contaminate the hands. The both can be the same. That applies equally to Sefer Torah, Tefillin and mezuzahs for the halacha of contaminating the hands, and regarding stitching with ligaments, that the Sefer Torah also has that halacha. Thank you for any time.